Episteme Scientia, the law of all that is, the grand unified theory, by Samuel J. Hunt, revised and digitized by Kevin J. Quinn, Jr. Audiobook narrated by AI. If a theory cannot explain the unexplainable, then that theory is unattainable. Here is the door, behind which, according to some people, the secret of the universe is waiting for you. Either that's true or it isn't. And if it isn't, then what the door really conceals is simply the greatest fraud, the most colossal sell on record. Isn't it obviously the job of every man, that is man and not a rabbit, to try and find out which and then devote his full energies to either serving this tremendous secret or to exposing and destroying this tremendous humbug? Christianity is a statement which, if false, is of no importance, and if true, is of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. C.S. Lewis. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Albert Einstein. Preface. The literal interpretation of the Genesis record of origins through the instrumentality of the scientific method has ever been an object of ridicule by the profane, who, having a rudimentary understanding of a single aspect of science without a foundation in Genesis, or having a rudimentary understanding of a single aspect of Genesis without a foundation in the sciences, on the one hand deem Scripture a foolishness which they do not want to understand, or on the other, deem science a stumbling block whose reasoning they cannot explain away. Thus faith, which up to the 20th century had defied the sophistry of the acutest skeptic, has since the advent of Darwinian evolution and Einstein relativity been shaken by an incredulous sneer. And Christians who in times past would have scorned to be argued out of their religion have in these last days not been ashamed to be laughed out of it. To establish by the testimony of the atheistic educational authorities the credibility of the historical account and record of the process by which all things were spoken into existence through the agency of an all-knowing Creator is my endeavor in the following treatise. Many have gone before me in similar paths, noticing similar circumstances wherein the text of the Genesis record, now itself more than 6,000 years old, has accurately predicted and recorded what science can only now, through sophisticated machinery and experimentation, observe to be true. Whatever information I have found relevant within those sets of circumstances, or apt in their illustrations, I have unhesitatingly adopted and as readily acknowledged. As Paul the Apostle wrote to the Thessalonians, "Test all things, hold fast to what is good." But where no reference records the author of any opinion, I am content to take responsibility on myself, desiring only that the whole theory may not be pronounced untenable on account of the deficiency of any inconsiderable portion of it. For the force of the argument consists not in the independent importance of every individual inference, but in the aggregate effect of all. To which, hereinforward, I have established the whole of the theory built on this four-cornered foundation, that the exact scriptural account of Genesis as recorded in the King James Version of the Bible should be upheld. The scientific literature as taught in my own university courses, as I have received it under the tutelage of my professors, considering only the processes and events that can be confirmed, reproduced, and observed in laboratories. Considering that all the events must be confirmed, reproduced, and observed by any layman to be happening all around them at any given time, and to be understood as happening the same way as recorded at any point in history from the first time until the last. Scientific or religious facts in themselves apparently insignificant, and coincidences between the two, which singly might be deemed fortuitous, often assume in connection a character and a consistency which amount to the weight of irresistible proof. If, therefore, by the aggregate testimony of facts inconsiderable in themselves, and considerable through the consistency with which they mutually support each other, the main object of this treatise, the transcendence of the Genesis cosmology as the law of all that is, can be proved, the point is gained, the proposition is demonstrated. Many Christian writers, failing to show the universal prevalence of the full accounts within the record, have reaped but half the advantages of their argument, and left wide the gate that leads to a purely materialistic scientific atheism that mystifies God as an ambiguous mythology left over from the Dark Ages, unexplainable by even his own disjointed followers. The writers of the past until now have left the multitudes either doubtful as pertaining the force of their arguments or relying for truth of it upon their authority only, while habitual unbelievers, deeming all such authorities suspicious, reject the reasoning and renounce the conclusion. I have therefore endeavored to establish the fact, while I appeal in some instances to the argument, to prove the universality that the spoken word of God is the creative force behind all matter, while I adduce the universal laws of science, as upheld by the atheistic scientific community, as a testimony to the truth of the Genesis record of origins. The plan of this work is simple. It professes to prove the Genesis record in almost every considerable facet of reality, whether ethereal, physical, or psychological, and to discover, in the sciences of every discipline, evidences as to the ways and means of the interworkings of every article as relating to creation by God. If these facts can be established, the conclusion is obvious that all such ideologies within the sciences have a common origin, and the most ancient and everlasting record, which contains their basis, must be the authentic record of the institution and orientation of all matter and non-matter. The only grand unified theory of everything containing this basis is the Genesis record as credited to Moses, who received the knowledge by revelation from God. The Genesis record of origins, therefore, contains the basis of the creation, integration, and proliferation of all matter, circumstance, and knowledge that can be attained in the heavens and the earth, all of reality. In conclusion, I must remark that the present edition of this treatise, although very superior to the last, both as to the correctness of information and quantity of new matter, is still only an introduction to what may be written upon the all-encompassing nature and scope of the Genesis record as connected with the existence of God and the origins of the containment of the all. And if this short syllabus shall be in any degree instrumental in the opening of the eyes of the blind, so that they may see the light of God and the truth of his content, it shall not have been written in vain. Introduction. The simplicity of the validation of creation rests upon 2 points. 1. Faith, interminable belief, empowers the overt believed in for the mind of the believer. And 2. The scientific proof that everything that is existent at its very core and inception is constructed from sound. Once something is believed in, it is of a necessity existent, whether it is a god or idol, life or death, magic or miracles, heaven or hell, the earth or she universe. Once you believe, it exists. If along comes an atheist to your belief and says, "I don't believe such and so," this further empowers the object believed in twofold and is necessarily existent now in the mind of the believer and the antagonist. In the case of a god, then the god must have been in existence first believed in, for it ever to be annulled or disbelieved in. Therefore gods do exist for the whole world, for protagonist and antagonist alike believe in a higher power than mankind, and if there are gods, then there must be a supreme God of all. The mind cannot conceive of something that has never existed before. The mind is only capable of constructing from already existent information. It cannot create new information. The mind can only construct from already existent pieces, because everything that exists begins with information. And information reveals itself to us through our 5 senses. Therefore, if you can taste, touch, smell, hear, or see it, even if only in your mind, then it is merely a construction and not an invention or creation. There is a faith record that a supreme God created all things, but what about a scientific record of a God who created all that is? There is a record of creation believed in and passed down for more than 6,000 years. That is what the world believes is a faith record. Therefore, it has become a faith record by demand. This record states that there is a supreme God who created, not constructed by hands, but invented by merely speaking all things into existence. But can this faith record likewise be verified through scientific experimentation and observation, and be proven mathematically to be correct? Is the Genesis record a step-by-step process or merely poetic literature dreamed up by the brilliant mind of an artist? The Genesis record is not only proven by faith to be true and correct, by the protagonist and the antagonist, it is also a step-by-step process that I shall prove herein is mathematically perfect, scientifically verifiable through experimentation and observation, and so simple in its properties that we are able to experience the phenomenon of creation and invention by the spoken word daily. Lastly, then, to prove the only record of the invention of all that is existent correct, we merely have to prove scientifically that everything is at its very core nothing more than sound.
If we can prove this mathematically and experimentally, then the Genesis record becomes a verifiable scientific law on the grandest scale. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Hebrews 1:1-3. It is by the knowledge of the Son that I am able to write and give those who have ears to hear this scientific knowledge of creation and invention. Foreword. First, there are no real particles or matter in the universe. There is only energy. Although we can see substance and observe certain aspects of their phenomenon, this does not allow us to understand reality and has led to the untold deaths of millions, even at present, because we create new substances based on presently accepted science, and it is actually the disruptor of and dissonant to reality. This dissonance is the cause of all proliferation of disease and death in the universe. Second, reality is everlasting and eternal, and is comprised of harmonic wave patterns and their interactions. It is these interactions that give rise to what we see as substance and all matter in the universe. The understanding and ability to manipulate constructively and the ability to understand and categorize certain wave patterns can lead to the development of true medicine and the end of all disease, death, and environmental destruction. Third, all wave patterns within our universe are based on sound. The understanding of this seemingly impossible phenomenon will be the turning point of mankind's destruction to his healing and the establishment of heaven on earth. Fourth, sound is the beginning and initiator of everything that has pattern. Sound, likewise, is the attractive force behind all magnetic energy in the universe. Fifth, zero-point energy is magnetic energy, an infinite amount of potential energy, until acted upon by another force. The hereinafter logical and experimental proof of these points will lead to one question. Now that we have described all existence to one phenomenon, that of sound, what made the first sound? There is only one explanation for this. Someone had to make the initial sound. That personality is God. After reading and understanding this hypothesis, you will be able to see that from these 5 points, all of creation sprang forth from the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That without the interaction of the 3 in 1 and the 1 in 3, nothing could exist or come into being. Further, this is not a battle of who's right and who's wrong. This treatise is about true understanding and the reconciliation of both science and the science of spirituality, commonly misnamed religion, neither of which am I a master, and both of which God is. The application. In this paper, I will prove that all matter in the universe is a symphony of sound based on waves, and that these waves can be mathematically constructed to produce a resultant or master wave sound. I will also attempt to show that sound carries an electric current and can be used within a magnetic field to produce all matter. These various sounds that are the foundation of all matter and interaction in the universe can be classified and sorted into a sound spectrum similar to the electromagnet spectrum of light. This sound spectrum is the alphabet God used during creation of all things. We too should be able to use this spectrum in the same manner that God did in conjunction with the ZPE field and the electromagnetic spectrum to create material objects. The only unknown variable is time. This is one factor that I will show is non-existent not only to God, but also to sound and light across the zero-point energy field, and is very real to us. The limitations to our ability. We cannot create anything new. We can, however, manipulate by the spoken word anything within the construct of creation. It is for this end we were created, formed from basic scientific principles. Einstein said, "When the solution is simple, God is answering." Occam's razor says that the simplest explanation with the least assumptions is probably correct. Well, there are two assumptions that need to be made for this to work. One, that past scientific experimental dogma could be misinterpreted, and in light of newer comprehension, and this hypothesis can be reinterpreted. Two, I actually might know what I'm talking about. I have had to make these assumptions my whole life in consideration of others. Hasn't everyone, especially those in school? So please open your mind, and by karma, give me all the respect I have afforded all the other so respected authorities in my life. Let down your walls, and let's just see what is possible based on experiments already conducted and knowledge already perceived. This came about when in Dr. Burris's Chemistry 120 class, I had come to the conclusion, based on the basic principles in Dr. Vandermeer's Physics 233 class, that hybridization and current bonding theories of atoms simply don't work. At this point, I discovered that these two branches were and are not cohesive. Actually, the more I began to think, the more Bohr's model of the atom didn't even appear to work. Well, after asking certain people certain questions, what I soon realized was that I had not been taught, but rather brainwashed, enough more difficult level theories and mathematics that would become undoubtedly even more confusing, and at the end I should not be able to understand fully anything, as I read Feynman's book to say, but should just accept that as the way things are, as one professor put it. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. So I decided to come up with my own model of the atom, which I have, and it fits not only into this hypothesis, but with only a slightly new interpretation of past experiments of Rutherford and Millikan and everything else I learned up to that point in Dr. Burris's class. It fits into science in general, and is also completely complementary to physics, biology, and all types of phenomenon we see every day in our world. Bohr's theory, sadly, from what I've learned, simply does not. So a huge thank you to all of my professors, and especially Dr. Vandermeer, who said, "I don't have the time to help you with this, but I encourage you to go forward with it. It's very interesting." So, that said, and being known, without further ado, I give you Book 3 in the series Episteme Scientia, The Law of All That Is, and God said, "All science must move in a logical order. You could not have biology before chemistry, and you could not have chemistry before physics, and then each of these orders would have their own hierarchy also. But we must establish that the building blocks of existence move upward from metaphysics to physics, to chemistry, to biology, to life form, not in importance, but in ability to function in harmony with the preceding principles of the science before it, and also with what came before each new aspect of the creation. Also, the chapters of what will be this book must also work in an escalating degree of enlightenment. Therefore, I need to state something here from chapter 2 for you to incorporate as I begin the logical proof of this hypothesis. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth, by understanding he established the heavens. Proverbs 3:19. Let's take a quick vocabulary lesson so that our limited minds may understand the magnitude of this statement. First, wisdom. The ability to judge soundly and deal sagaciously with facts, especially as they relate to life and conduct, discernment and judgment. Discretion, sagacity, scientific or philosophical knowledge, erudition, learning. Second, sagacious, of keen penetration and judgment, discerning, perspicacious. Third, perspicacious, clear-sighted, of acute mental vision or discernment. Fourth, erudition, characterized by a wide knowledge of a bookish kind, scholarship. Fifth, learning, acquisition of knowledge or skill, to ascertain. Sixth, scientific, accumulated knowledge systemized and formulated with reference to discovery of general truths or the operation of general laws. Seventh, philosophical, in actual usage the science which investigates the facts and principles of reality and of human nature and conduct.
the science which comprises logic, ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, and the theory of knowledge. Webster's American Family Dictionary, SYN. Understand and comprehend are used interchangeably to imply clear perception of the meaning of something, but, more precisely, understand stresses the full awareness or knowledge arrived at, and comprehend the process of grasping something mentally. Lone may comprehend the words in an idiom without understanding at all what is meant. Appreciate implies sensitive, discriminating perception of the exact worth or value of something to appreciate the difficulties of a situation. Now let us reread the scripture in the fullness of our understanding. The Lord, by keen penetration and clear-sighted, acute mental vision, and by his accumulated knowledge, systemized and formulated the principles of reality and of human nature and conduct, comprising logic, ethics, aesthetics, and metaphysics. And by his scholarship and skill, judging soundly with the facts, especially as they relate to life, hath organized and set up the earth, and by clear perception and in full awareness of the exact value of his creation, established the heavens. All right, with this in mind, we can begin. Scientists fail to admit they do not have the slightest idea what energy is. Richard Feynman. Chapter 1. Sound, waves, vacuums, ether. A wave can be thought of as a vibrating disturbance by which energy is transmitted. Waves are characterized by their length and height, and by the number of waves that pass through a certain point in 1 second. More precisely, the electric current in a wire is defined as the net amount of charge that passed through the wire's Ella medium. Full cross-section at any point per unit time. Thus, the current 1 is defined as 1 equals triangle Q divided by triangle T, where triangle Q is the amount of charge that passes through a conductor. A conductor is material which contains movable electric charges in which an electric current can be produced at any location during the time interval triangle T. Sound can be defined as transmitted waves or wave transmission of any frequency in any medium. Therefore, all energy transmitted by or comprised of a wave is sound, and all matter in any type of medium that is comprised of energy has a specific sound signature, a chord, by which it may be called spoken into existence. The universe is the medium, and everything in it carries a current. This is the secret of the universe and the grand unified theory of all things. The rest of this paper explains how it all fits together through mathematics, experiment, and everyday phenomena. By the way, those are direct quotes from my current textbooks in chemistry and physics. The frequency of a sound wave can be calculated by frequency equals the speed of sound over wavelength, where VE is frequency, CE is the speed of sound, and the math symbol lambda is the wavelength. This equation can also be written C equals lambda. Similarly, the frequency of a light wave can be calculated using the same equation. V equals the speed of sound over lambda, where V is frequency, C is the speed of light, and lambda is the wavelength. This equation can also be written C equals lambda V. Then, by definition, at some point and under certain conditions, lambda V equals lambda V and C equals C. This is only logical, even if it were simple geometry where AB equals C in equation 1 and AB equals C in equation 2. In equation 1, we might assign 6 times 1 equals 6, and in equation 2, we might assign 3 times 2 equals 6. Yet even though the properties of both equations are characteristically different, the outcome is the same C. In other words, both equations, even with different integers, mean the same thing. It is the same with the speed of light and the speed of sound. Both equations are derived from the same integers because they are both waves with the same characteristics in that they traverse space, the same construction of recurrence and rhythm in cyclic motions, and therefore the same product, speed. And in the beginning, they are the same speed. Actually,
Sound came before light. I know what you're thinking, but by the end of this hypothesis, you will see that this is a fact. Let's begin with your objection that sound has to have a medium to travel through, but light does not. And quite frankly, there will only be one other objection you have to the properties of these two waves being the same. You will say that a light wave is actually an electric wave and a magnetic wave traveling together. In Part 2a, this will be reinterpreted also, after this foundation is laid in Part 1. Well, let's carry on and see what happens and look at different mediums. A solid. Sound. 1. Light. 0. Sound waves are slowed to a degree, but can pass through pretty easily. Visible light waves, on the other hand, cannot and are actually absorbed by most all solid matter. Transmission of light has to do with the medium's opacity, how much light is allowed to pass through. Glass is a solid and transmits light much better than water vapor, clouds, which is a gas. Additionally, light is only one example of electromagnetic waves. Other EMF waves can quite easily pass through solids, depending on the molecular structure of the material. So, what about the light over your head? Actually, you were designed to exist by a certain spectrum of light that radiates from the sun. The light that is radiating from over your head right now is not anywhere close to that spectrum. So, what are you absorbing? You are absorbing a dissonant waveform. When you are in perfect health, your waveform is totally harmonic. The sunlight is harmonic with that. But any other type of artificial light, except one, is causing your body to absorb dissonant wavelengths. This can and will cause problems in your body and is well documented. A liquid. Sound. 2. Light. 1. Sound waves can travel through liquids differently than a solid and are distorted and slowed down, but still travel through water. Light passes through pretty easily also, but is slowed somewhat because of refraction. A gas. Sound. 3. Light. 2. Sound travels through dry air at its accepted constant, 340.29 meters per second, but will travel at different speeds through different gaseous mediums at different temperatures. This kind of proves my point earlier about the speed of waves. They are never really constant, but waves and their patterns are typically dependent on environmental variables. For example, throughout the history of the Earth, the dry air, although made of the same types of gases, probably did not have the same individual concentrations as we do today. This probably would have made the constant somewhat different than it is today, because the air was more pristine. In the future, or on particularly toxic days and at high temperatures, the speed at which sound will travel may be slowed somewhat because of heavy volatile organic compounds present in the atmosphere. Nevertheless, it was probably not significantly different, right? But it is good to have this understanding that so-called constants are not really that at all, and in a world where we can measure space accurately to the trillionth of an inch or more, then the slightest change in the medium is actually a very big deal, especially when talking about propagations that are infinitely large and infinitely small, such as in the beginnings of our creation. The slightest degree of error, say, in the Earth's orbit, 93 million miles of only 12 inches off path, and we could burn up or freeze to death. Anyway, the equation for the speed of sound is V equals yRt over m, where y is adiabatic constant, r is the universal gas constant, T is the absolute temperature, and m is the molecular weight of the gas in kilogram mole. At 0 degrees Celsius, sound will travel through air at 331.5 meters per second, and through carbon dioxide at 258 meters per second, and through hydrogen at 1,270 meters per second. Light traveling through a gaseous medium has the same boundaries of temperature and density and weight of the gas in the medium. Experiments have proven that using rubidium warmed to 80 degrees Celsius have stopped light and captured it, and through cold sodium gas can slow it down dramatically. Well, no matter though. As long as sound can't travel in outer space, then there will always be at least one fundamental difference between light and sound to effectively prove my equations. Lambda VE equals lambda V and C equals C. Wrong, right? Well, not really. This is a long-held assumption that is no longer valid, but is still taught in school. Space is actually a gaseous medium through which sound can travel. Sound can travel through outer space because space is not the total vacuum it's often made out to be. Atoms of gas give the universe a ubiquitous, present everywhere at once, atmosphere of sorts, albeit a very thin one. Sound, unlike light, travels by compressing medium. Space, though not as efficient, can also serve as a medium. A vacuum, sound, 4, light, 3. Before we tackle sound in a vacuum, let's look at how light passes through a vacuum. But first, what is a vacuum? We have held for a long time that space was a vacuum, a vast empty space with no atmosphere and nothing in it but darkness. Yet, after reading the above-mentioned quote, that position and understanding is no longer valid. Well, that's all well and good, but we know for a fact that the inside of a glass tube that's been cooled down and had everything sucked out of it is a vacuum and completely empty of everything, a void, just nothingness in there, right? Well, actually that isn't true either. The type of space that you think is a vacuum, an emptiness, a void with nothing in it, is actually called a bare vacuum. What can be created in a lab in some sort of tube is actually called a physical vacuum. The difference here is extremely significant and actually could be the fatal blow to the Big Bang theory. The mysterious nature of the vacuum is revealed by quantum electrodynamics. It is not an empty nothing, but contains randomly fluctuating magnetic fields with an infinite zero-point energy. In order for there to be an extremely dense point in space that could explode, as in the Big Bang theory, then it would have to be, by definition, in a physical vacuum because a bare vacuum is emptiness and a complete void containing nothing. So what was it in? A zero-point energy field would be a good explanation, except zero-point energy, often referred to as ether or the energy of space, is an energy field that spans the entire universe. Contrary to our current limitations in measurement, this universal field exists everywhere in the universe, radiates in every direction with equal pressure, and has no vibration. Radiation implies vibration, but this is not necessarily so. Like the depths of the ocean, an object at the bottom receives the pressure from all the water above it. This fluid pressure is equal in all directions, and is why we haven't noticed its effects before the advent of quantum mechanics. The universal ZPE field is like the surface of an absolutely still pond. It has no movement. It is all one surface. However, when something moves through the surface of the water, it disrupts the surface, creating waves. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Genesis 1:2. This exploding in a ZPE field effect can be seen in space as exploding stars collapse in on themselves, not from some form of gravity inside their core, but from the pressure of the ZPE field itself, similar to an explosion under extremely deep water. I am sorry to all the cosmologists out there, but even if somehow the explosion of the Big Bang escaped an infinite amount of pressure to the 4 power, then something would have had to jiggle the field in order that the explosion would have a chance of escaping the pressure of the totally still infinite ZPE field. So what or who jiggled it? Perhaps it was one of those giant turtles swimming by to catch the Earth on its back. Okay, seriously, that was only to lighten the mood a bit. But now we have to find out who jostled the ZPE medium in the beginning, which I will explain in a minute. Where were we? Oh yes, light traveling through a vacuum. What has been one of the most accepted ideas, but essentially proven wrong in light of above quotes, is that there is no ether in outer space. And the foundation for this is the Michelson-Morley experiment. The Michelson and Morley experiment proved that the speed of light in the apparatus was constant in all orientations, and thus the theory of ether was wrong. I don't know if Michelson and Morley ran them, but they could have. Similar tests have shown that the speed of light depends on the temperature and humidity of the air. It also depends on the velocity of the air. Fill the interferometer with anything, and you find the speed of light depends on the properties of the media you use to fill it. fill it with water, and the speed slows appropriately. The experiment did not show that the speed was a universal constant. Note that the Michelson and Morelli experiment could be repeated using sound instead of light, and one gets the same result, and that is that the speed depends on the medium inside the interferometer and is the same in all orientations. Measuring the effect of the temperature or velocity of the air in the interferometer is easy. But when one puts the interferometer in a vacuum, where we now know there is still something there, measuring the effect of the temperature or velocity of the vacuum becomes meaningless. Thus, one cannot prove that the speed of light is constant in a vacuum until one answers the question, constant with respect to what? How can one heat up a vacuum? How can one accelerate a vacuum? What if the vacuum is moving at a speed close to c? All meaningless questions. Measure the photons that were generated in galaxies moving at warp speed, or measure the photons from your desk lamp and you will get the same answer. Measure the photons hitting you as your spaceship is traveling at 0.9 Celsius and you will get the same answer. The speed of the photon is totally a function of the medium inside your test setup. The old distance divided by time. We know of no difference in the photons produced by atomic explosions or a candle from exceeding galaxies or stationary lamps. This is because the ZPE field is omnipresent, even present in between all the particles that make up you and me. Okay, just so you know, there is a scientist named Brian Setterfield of Australia who has proven that the speed of light has decreased beyond the explanation of experimental error over the past 300 years. If the velocity of light is constant, how is it that invariably new determinations give values which are lower than the last one obtained? There are 22 coincidences in favor of a decrease of the velocity of light, while there is not a single one against it. Frozen light in laboratory experiments prove that light can be stopped, trapped, and even reversed at certain temperatures in certain gas mediums. Wouldn't the same thing apply in space? Of course. Yet supposedly this is how the expansion, distance to other planets and galaxies, and birth date of the universe is explained, light traveling in a perfect bare vacuum. So experimentally it can be shown that light, through different mediums and temperatures in space, can be slowed down, sped up, or even trapped and frozen. But the million-dollar question is, can light be shown to go faster than the accepted constant of 186,000 miles per second? Indeed it can. According to CNN on the 20th of July 2000, the article states, "Light can break its own speed limit, researchers say." Li Jun Wang, a researcher at the NEC Institute who conducted the experiment, said, "Our experiment shows that the generally held misconception that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light is wrong." The experiment was conducted in Princeton, New Jersey, wherein a pulse of laser light was sent through a cesium vapor and traveled 310 times the distance it would have in a vacuum. Couple this with what we now know about space being filled with gases of various kinds, some as of yet may be unknown and at various temperatures. Then could this be the end of the theory of relativity? Indeed. Further, since the speed of light is not a constant, and the age of the universe, based on the speed of light in a vacuum, supposedly space, is dependent on the concentration of the gas, temperature, and pressure, gravity of the portion of the medium it travels through, then the age of the universe as billions of years could also be wrong. Indeed, it is but tomfoolery. Further, with this in mind, the supposed gravitational bending of light becomes and shows nothing more than the slowing down or speeding up of the wave as it enters a new set of varying conditions in a new portion of the medium of the universe it is traveling through. This is no different than light as it travels through water. Where the fish actually is compared to where we see it in the water is two different things. All the planets and bodies in space can be viewed the same way, since we not only are looking outward through an Earth atmosphere that is full of water, but we are also looking outward through the plasmasphere of the Sun, through which all the planets in the solar system travel, and also the plasmasphere of the whole galaxy. Then, We also must look through the plasmasphere of the whole known universe. Where each entity in the universe actually is, with respect to where we see it is, are two different things because of refraction. See Appendix A, Relativity and Water in Space. Refraction, the change of direction of a ray of light, sound, heat, or the like, in passing obliquely from one medium into another in which its wave velocity is different. Here is a picture of the 3 Kelvin background radiation temperature of the universe. In this picture, the whiter the spot is the hotter the temperature, and the darker the spot is the cooler the temperature. Likewise, different stars have different temperatures. Therefore, the plasma they emit in the space around them will be heated to varying degrees. Obviously, the closer one gets to the light bulb, the hotter it is as well. Supernova shockwave creates halo effect. At 10:50 19th of August 2005, the NewScientist.com news service author Maggie McKee reported an observation made with the Hubble Space Telescope and Chandra X-ray Observatory of a bright supernova that exploded in 1987. Now, that shockwave appears to have reached the edge of the galaxy and is heating the dense gas there to millions of degrees. 3 things to notice here in this short clip. 1. Density of the medium in a portion of outer space. 2. Gas of various kinds densely occupies space, equals no perfect bare vacuum. And 3. Temperature is in the millions of degrees. The same phenomenon on Earth is the same phenomenon in space. This is true around every star and every group of stars in the universe, so that the whole universe is completely filled with atmosphere, objects, and portions of varying mediums of varying quality, quantity, and temperature. Conclusion: the speed of light constant and the accepted scientific age of the universe is a fiction. Speed of light is based on the idea of the vacuum. It is completely dependent on the permeability of the free space vacuum. A perfect vacuum is one where the gaseous pressure is absolute zero, but is only a philosophical concept and has never been observed in nature or a laboratory and does not exist anywhere in the universe. When physics talks about the speed of light being a constant in a vacuum, they are not talking about anything practical or real. Physics discusses the speed of light constant while referring to a perfect vacuum which doesn't exist. The speed of light constant is nothing more than a philosophical idea and a purely mathematical entity that only exists on chalkboards and in the minds of wishful thinking. Likewise, there is no permeability constant anywhere in the universe because space in any location compared to any other location contains at least different gases at different pressure, temperature, and density, not to mention all stellar bodies and planets. The permeability constant is merely a mathematical designation, not a reality, and is likewise dependent on what it is traveling through. Permeability is the degree that an object is affected by a magnetic field and is a characteristic of matter, takes up space, and contains mass. So, by definition, free space would be void of all matter. But there is no point anywhere in existence that does not contain some amount of matter. And since there are varying degrees of matter everywhere at all times, then there can be no such thing as permeability constant. It is in name only, and not a practical concept. The same goes for the permittivity constant. It is only a constant in the philosophy, not science, of a perfect vacuum. The calculation of permittivity is based on a dielectric, which is an insulator that is highly resistant to the flow of a current. Yet, electricity alone cannot flow in a perfect vacuum. The perfect vacuum itself becomes the perfect dielectric insulator against current. Therefore, in the model of free space, the permittivity constant is zero. This then leads to only one conclusion, and is confirmed and proven by vacuum experiments themselves. There is always something in there, the prime substance of energy before light, or any known matter that can exist in a complete void, a true perfect vacuum, is magnetism. Further, this material, which is massless and spaceless, had to exist from eternity to eternity without end, unless nothing can make itself something which is impossible. This is the substance of God, and what was before creation, and it pervades all space. This is what moved into the void mentioned in Genesis 1. 2. The only two descriptors we have for is magnetic energy. The Bible calls him spirit, life, and love. These three will become very important at the end of this book. Considering the points above, let's look at the breakdown of these equations concerning the speed of light. Looking closely at the equation, how can the speed of light be derived from the speed of light? That is impossible. That would be akin to me asking how I got into this chair to type this in and answering, because I am here. This is a mathematical example of begging the question. In logic, begging the question has traditionally described a type of logical fallacy, petitio principii, in which the proposition to be proved is assumed implicitly or explicitly in one of the premises. Begging the question is related to the fallacy known as circular argument, circulus in probando, vicious circle, or circular reasoning. All circular arguments have this characteristic. The proposition to be proved is assumed at some point in the argument. I would like to expose one other fiction to you. The whole light constant philosophy rests on one variable, and that is the mass of a photon particle. A particle is defined as a small, tiny piece of anything, or anybody having finite mass and internal structure but negligible dimensions. Another property of particles in physics is that they can move from where they are to where they were previously not, whose movement can be defined as momentum, speed, or velocity. According to Newton, pp equals mv, where p is momentum, m is mass, and v is velocity. So here is the million-dollar question. Does a photon particle have mass while at rest? No. Another question. Does a photon particle have mass when it is moving? Yes, according to Ask an Astrophysicist, Goddard Space Flight Center. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Well, not to physics, and here is why. First of all, a photon, as being a particle, is another philosophical invention. It must have mass while moving, otherwise its fictional creation wouldn't obey Newton's second law. If its mass were zero, then in the equation above its momentum would be zero, and it would never move, and that would go against the observational fact that light, photon being a particle of light, travels. Secondly, the reason it must be zero mass at rest is that if it didn't, Einstein's theory would crumble. Why? Because nothing that has mass can travel at the speed of light. Therefore, if this fictional photon had mass at rest, then it would not be able to travel at its own accepted constant. Now, do you see why this is circular reasoning? Can you see beyond the fiction? This is nothing but philosophy and psychological befuddlery. First, a photon has never been observed at rest. Secondly, it is a fictional entity. It was created to describe functions of light that physics could not explain otherwise, which would mean there were entities observed that were outside the realm of matter and physics, that is Young's double-slit experiment. So how did the speed of light constant become a part of physics? By definition. Who defined it? Elected council members at a conference, much like the recent one concerning Pluto being a planet or not, much like the Council of Nicene, much like any council ever elected to govern any conference ever. At the 1985 Conference General des Poids et Mesures, the official definition of the meter was adopted. The meter is the length of the path traveled by light in a vacuum during a time interval of 1/299,792,458 of a second. In essence, this means that this council defined the speed of light to be a constant and what the speed of that constant was. It is constant, as I have endeavored to prove, by definition, philosophical only. Without this constant, Einstein's theory of relativity crumbles. As was stated earlier, there has never been a bare vacuum. The reason light can travel in a vacuum is because there has always been a magnetic field, energy, or, in other words, zero-point energy in any vacuum created, including the universe before matter. There has never, ever, ever been observed or existed light without the presence of this energy. Now, physics wants to make another fictional particle called a graviton, a particle of gravity, and force it to work in ways which are impossible to observe, and wrap it up in a fiction called string theory. See Appendix B. The truth is that light and gravity, magnetism, are not matter. We use these terms to describe spiritual entities. Physics tries to create fictional particles so that it can describe them as matter. Otherwise, they would have to admit there is something beyond matter, and Genesis would be obviously true. Right now, because of these dreamed-up theories, the fact of Genesis has been pushed off into obscurity. To state that the speed of light is independent of the velocity of the observer is very counterintuitive. Some people even refuse to accept this as a logically consistent possibility. But in 1905, Einstein was able to show that it is perfectly consistent if you are prepared to give up assumptions about the absolute nature of space and time. The theory of relativity and Einstein's philosophy only works if you don't want to believe there are any absolutes like truth, time, God, and what you see happening all around you. Hence, true physics wasn't born with the advent of Einstein's theory, but the philosophy of reality depends on the observer. There are no absolutes was. Relativity isn't science, it is only philosophy. Well, my point is not to bash accepted scientific phenomena. My point is to destroy the religious dogma that parades around in emperor's clothes calling itself science. Relativity is false. There is a better substitute, as will be described throughout this book, for the description of reality and is real science. More on this can be read in Appendix A. You can't just accept it as that's the way it is. And my point here about light traveling in a vacuum is that 1. Space is not a vacuum. 2. It must be a physical vacuum because we have never observed light traveling in a bare vacuum. 3. Light, based on these unavoidable evidences, is not a constant and is also affected by the medium through which it travels, just like sound. 4. Light, as well as anything else, by definition, cannot travel through a bare vacuum. This will become solidified in Part 3. 5. The speed of light depends implicitly upon the temperature, pressure, and content of the medium through which it travels and is not a constant. 6. The accepted scientific age of the universe is false. Inside the physical vacuum containing the randomly fluctuating ZPE field, the void randomized particles suddenly appear, then instantly disappear. This is predicted by quantum mechanics. In connection, the Casimir force is important to note here. Casimir predicted that force F equals K over D4, where K equals P hc over 480. This shows that the Casimir force is inversely proportional to distance to the fourth power. QED predicts the all-pervading vacuum continuously spawns particles and waves that spontaneously pop in and out of existence. Their time of existence is strictly limited by the uncertainty principle, but they create some havoc while they bounce around during their brief lifespan. This can be visualized as popcorn in a kettle, where the inside of the kettle becomes the physical vacuum and the resting popcorn. No, there are no particles in an ocean-like magnetic field becomes the ZPE field. As the popcorn pops, these become randomized particles that appear then instantly disappear, or perhaps simply take on another appearance. But do not get confused. There is no external heat source in the beginning of reality to pop the popcorn out of our ZPE field. At the beginning of creation, there is only the ZPE field itself, which I will illustrate in a moment. This could be further visualized as the top layer of boiling water, where the fluctuations smash together and out pops a vapor, but then disappears into the medium above it. But here again, don't get confused because the ZPE field does not have a defining surface. It is omnipresent in all directions. Also, in our boiling pot, what is really happening? On the surface, there is a randomized wave pattern. As these waves crash into each other, a smaller yet intact version of these fluctuations is suspended above the medium. Since air is denser than the vapor, this newly formed wave code is forced higher and higher until it disappears into and becomes part of the wave code of a separate question mark medium. Although, if you think about it, both of these mediums are at their core simply wave patterns of the ZPE field itself. Only it is no longer randomized, but systemized and categorized into specific wavelengths of varying density and proportions at different temperatures, patterns that are constantly being discovered and trying to be understood. The hierarchy would be something like ZPE to light to particles, smaller but intact versions of the whole system, to gas, to vapor, to liquid, to soul, to powder, to non-metal, to metal. And of course, each of these would have their own subdivisions, and as all of these would interact with one another, not based on random processes, because we know that dissonant waves cancel each other out, but based on mathematically precise harmonic wave patterns, we end up with what we classify today as the bright line spectra of all the elements, the periodic table and all of their isotopes, even the ones we may not know of yet. But let's not forget where we're going here. Sound is wave transmission of any frequency in any medium. So let's get back to the beginning. The ZPE field in our physical vacuum is omnipresent and extended in all directions at the same time. It is acting like our boiling pot and kettle of popcorn, sending smaller but intact versions of itself into another part of the medium. Hence, the appearance and disappearance. The distance of separation, if you will, should create a measurable length. That will create a distance that can be measured, probably in an arc form. Some will be longer and shorter, and up or down, etc. Randomly, termed thus because we have limited understanding concerning the process throughout the entire medium, organized and calculable based on precedent. The same type of events are happening all around us. That is snow and rain, a dust storm, leaves falling, etc. The measurement of these arc lengths can be thought of in two ways familiar to us. First, think about the line on a heart monitor that measures the pump pattern of the heart. As a particle, a portion of the whole, appears and disappears, it blips the monitor of our ZPE field sort of like a pulse, or pump of the heart. Does this mean it's a living entity? If we were to measure this over time, and some blips were higher or lower, longer or shorter, then all of a sudden you have yet another transmitted wave with a measurable amplitude, wavelength, and frequency. Eureka! We have sound! What is your ZPE field saying to you today? Well, it would be a little different than actual notes, because in a ZPE field there is no time. We observe time, but the field does not because it is infinite. This is partly why there is no audible sound in space, because of time refraction. The second way to think about this is to tap out staccato notes on a piano, except without the length and echo of the reverberation. As the appearance and disappearance of particles happen, a similar staccato note could be played. The greater the arc length from the field, the more keys it would pass from middle C on the piano. No, I am not saying that a ZPE field sounds like a piano. All I am saying is that in a ZPE field, even though it is instantaneous to us, we can, through the invention of time, slow it down so that our ears can hear what it might sound like. Actually, this goes for all waves and matter movement in the universe. Actually, about that joke, what is your ZPE field saying to you today? Everyone has spiritual ears. This will become clear in Chapter 5. Even though some of us have turned them off or rebelled against their input, they are still there. Some of us have practiced listening with them for so long that they are almost second nature. This ZPE field is connected to everything that exists. Is it any stretch of the imagination that it could be used for communication? The tuning in and practice of using those ears is what we call the conscience, or more deeply the ability to hear the voice of God Himself, which I will prove in a moment. So here are some of the points I've tried to establish here about the ZPE field. 1. This field is capable of carrying sound, and in the future can be used for communication. 2. That from this medium, all other mediums, commonly called the elements, come into existence by progression from light to metal. 3. That everything that exists is based on this life force. 4. Sound came before light. Well, that being said, what does this have to do with sound in a vacuum? I hope it is obvious now that sound can travel in a vacuum, a physical vacuum. I would like to reiterate the point that neither light nor sound, nor anything for that matter, can travel in or through a bare vacuum, which, sorry to say, obliterates all the wormhole theories and the whole travel phenomenon associated with them, except that black holes are physical vacuums. But then, planets and stars and other matter wouldn't become void, would they? 0-point energy is just like that. Very few percent of ZPE radiation hits a given particle. However, the Earth is a gigantic collection of particles, and a lot more ZPE radiates from above than makes it through the unbelievable maze of ZPE absorbing particles below. There's that pressure differential, and thus you have gravity. So, how are we getting free energy? Well, it's the 0-point energy field that holds matter together, right? Of course it is. And many experiments involving ZPE include some kind of manipulations of the surrounding field, right? Particle turbulence, plasma turbulence, high-order particle oscillations. Yes, these are ZPE wakes, like the wake left behind a boat going fast. However, it is ZPE that holds matter together at every level. If a particle does not have 100% of the ZPE radiation that it is supposed to, then it does not maintain 100% integrity. In other words, it disintegrates. Disintegrating over time is simply becoming diseased, aging, and dying. This is why modern medicine cannot cure anyone. It is not harmonic with the sound of our bodies and what we are made of. Therefore, we have escalation of death instead of an ebbing of death. It begins with the introduction of man-made chemicals in the food supply and our environment. We try to treat the effects of this dissonance with more man-made chemicals, creating more dissonance. It is as the new adage goes, drugs make the sick get sicker quicker. Drugs are nothing more than chemicals. The black holes in the universe are actually a bare vacuum. It has become easier for science to imagine such grandiose ideas as traveling in time through wormholes in parts of space so far away. Why would it ever be necessary to reach them instead of accepting the simplicity of a creator who made you for a reason? We may not have the ears to hear, but as long as there is something in there that transmits vibration, that is randomly fluctuating magnetic fields, then there is sound. The reason sound and light waves have so many likenesses is that you cannot have light without having sound first. They are merely reciprocals of each other. Every part of all existence in this world will have wave-particle duality because sound and light makes everything in the universe visible. After further reading into this hypothesis, I am sure that you will see that the particle nature of all matter is the ZPE field, and the wave nature of all matter is the sound that brought all the particles together to make it what it is. Sound is a longitudinal wave that consists of alternating condensations and rarefactions, current, and can exist only in a medium. Well, we now know that goes the same for everything else too. A condensation is a region where the pressure in the medium is higher than normal, while a rarefaction is a region where the pressure is less than normal. As a result, when the condensations and rarefactions pass any point in the medium, the pressure at that point fluctuates above and below the norm. When a sound wave passes through, however, the fluid density does fluctuate in time, and this answers who jiggled who. The perfectly still ZPE field in the beginning, and God said. As the source of the wave vibrates against the fluid, some fluid particles are pushed together and others are made to move apart, the initial covalent bonding of all compounds throughout the steps of creation. Where the particles are crowded together, the density and pressure increase above the norm. Where the particles are moved apart, the density and pressure decrease below the norm. These changes in pressure of the fluid are what constitute the sound wave. Star formations happen in regions of condensation, or pinched, and star deaths happen in regions of rarefaction, or spreading outward. Above, he said that the sound wave was what caused the fluid to fluctuate in time. Then his last statement was that the changes in the fluid are what make sound. This is contradictory. His last statement should say the opposite. The change in pressure of the fluid is a consequence of the sound wave as it passes. Meaning this, the sound wave came first, Not that fluid pressure change came first and sound was the result, as we have always been taught. So this answers the age-old question. If a tree falls in a forest and you aren't there to hear it, does it make a sound? I think we can conclusively say yes to that. Let's do a little addition here. 1. The quantum well experiment tells us the sound wave creates laterally polarizing electric fields. Then 2. The usual waveform of an AC power circuit is a sine wave, as this results in the most efficient transmission of energy. 3. Lateral means situated on its side. 4. Webster says polarizing is to cause the induction of polarity in a ferromagnetic substance. Magnetization. 5. Induction is the generation of electromotive force by a varying magnetic flux. Well then, what we can summarize from this is, sound can be a sine wave situated on its side that is efficiently transmitting energy in the form of an alternating electric current that produces a magnetic force. And it is this sound wave, the alternating current that produces a magnetic field, that is the basis of all attraction and creation in the universe, including waves, matter, life forms, and even spiritual bodies like God and the angels. This is grounded in 2 principles I have learned this semester in physics, the Ørsted and Faraday effects. You turn on a current and the magnet moves, but you move the magnet and current is generated electromagnetic induction. Sound can transmit energy in the form of a current, so the current in the beginning was God's voice, then God moved the magnetic field, which I will get to a little later, and He created the power for all things to exist. Not to get ahead of myself, but He instituted the power for all matter to be able to regenerate itself indefinitely. Consequently, this knowledge could lead to a way to extract and use ZPE for limitless, self-sustaining, clean energy. Introduce a certain sound into the medium at a specific amplitude, period, and frequency, and the suddenly appearing and disappearing particles of the ZPE field will predictably become either suspended between, like Millikan's oil drops, or completely move to the new energy field and then can be transported via the wave to somewhere it can be stored and used for energy. This is what we see as bunching of particles, hence molecules, rooms of furniture, populations, and books, versus repulsion of particles, the opposite. So evidently, we are all in a giant cold fusion reactor with an infinite amount of energy. And this fact is the death blow to evolution of the species. What is the cost of messing around with free energy from cold fusion? The slightest miscalculation could cause an energy release that could pull oceans over cities, collapse continents, or even pull us out of our orbit into a collision course with another planet. Therefore, nothing could have happened by random, blind, unguided processes. Because in creating the universe with everything in it, all things would have had to come together almost instantaneously and working properly, or, in considering the massive forces at work outside of our atmosphere, nothing would have ever worked. There is only one chance to get if chat, cause dissonance would have destroyed the possibility of a second chance. And since all creation involving the universe and everything in it is built layer upon layer, then life on this planet could not evolve by random process either. At this point, you should review the 5 points of my hypothesis listed in the beginning of this paper. By now, I should have given you plenty of evidence for the possibility of those points to be true. Also, I have endeavored to shake the foundations of some pretty well-accepted theories with regards to the beginning, and I believe that has been accomplished as well. So what next? Oh yes, the good stuff. All that I have left to do is prove that God is real. If you couldn't already enter that by fiat, I hope from here out, you will see and understand the logic, science, and evidence behind this truth. The beginning of creation. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Genesis 1, 2. An interesting definition of the word void is an open space or break in continuity. But from a perspective of pre-creation, the only continuity here is that of God Himself and the spiritual matter of all life at that time, magnetic energy, gravity. actually to say open space, although it gives a better picture. In this context is not really valid since space, the absence of matter, substance, can be measured as a plot of distance. But here, space or outer space did not even exist yet, and let's remember about what time this was written. It was a period in history where people knew one thing: they were standing on something. The earth was underfoot and the stars were overhead, but it wasn't even called outer space yet. It was all, the whole universe to us today, the earth. Well, of course, add to this, without form, and you get absolute nothingness or non-existence, which is a vacuum wherein existed only the energy of God life. Science has observed this limitless, containerless, all-pervading field, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Genesis 1. 2 Newton's first law of motion. You need an outside force to move anything at rest. This spirit, which moved over the waters/fluid-like ZPE field, is the will of God, emotion and desire to create. This will or spirit will be discussed fully in chapter 5. The author of Genesis could only describe this energy by calling it the waters. Remember earlier when I asked if it was alive? I also asked the question, what jiggled the field to begin with? Well, here is your answer. It is a living energy, God's life force, and it is living, which means it is already jiggly. Also, this proves another fine aspect of something commonly heard from religion about the attempt to overcome evolution. It is often said that God is capable of creating something out of nothing. Well, this is erroneous. God cannot. He must abide by the same laws he used to create our world, because he became part of our world later on. He took a piece of himself, his rib, and cloned our world from it. Remember, everything that comes after is based on the precedent set before it. Is it any stretch to connect the infinite ZPE to the infinite life force of God? Especially since we know that moving magnetic fields produce electric fields, and electricity is the basis of all life, even the life of God. So from the evidence recorded in Genesis 1, 2, and scientific evidence of ZPE fields, we can conclude that 1. A bare vacuum existed before creation in which the spirit was moved into. 2. Science has described the spiritual substance of God, and it is the ZPE field that permeates everything in our creation. 3. That field is what created the physical vacuum in which everything could be created. 4. That spirit and the ZPE field is the material from which all particles would spring forth and are particles of the same Spirit of God. Easily now, without even looking at the scripture or even knowing it, what is the first logical step of creating? What is it that God is going to do to begin his work? What is it that makes everything in the universe visible? Sound and light. Let's say you wanted to go into an empty, dark room and paint the walls. What is the first thing you're going to do? Turn on the lights, right? The first thing God is going to do within the darkness of the waters of the deep, the void wherein he moved his own spirit, is turn on the light. How is he going to do it? By speaking light into existence. The first act of God in creation is to speak light into existence from out of the waters. Does science have a way to recreate this event? In order to call Genesis creation science, it must be reproducible, right? So is there an experiment that proves sound can produce light? Indeed there is, and it is called sonoluminescence. Hello, my name is Chris Peterson. I am a physics major at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and no longer at Shasta College in Redding, California. While at Shasta College, I completed an independent study on single-bubble sonoluminescence, SBSL, under Tom Masulis. Joe Polin, Douglas Manning, and I were successful in making sonoluminescence. This is an incredible phenomenon where sound can be converted into light. Sonoluminescence was discovered by accident, like most applications in science, in the early 1930s by a pair of German physicists at the University of Cologne. It hasn't been until the last 10 years that theorists and researchers have really given sonoluminescence an audience. The leading work is being done by Seth J. Putterman, Robert A. Hiller, and Bradley P. Barber at UCLA. While this group has published many papers on sonoluminescence, the most popular of their papers can be found in Scientific American, February 1995, volume 272. To make SBSL, single bubble sonoluminescence, one has to have a bubble of plain air surrounded by water in a spherical flask and then bombarded by high-frequency sound waves. This causes the bubble to contract, and as this happens, something very spectacular happens. The bubble starts emitting light. Light, as in photons, are being emitted from this bubble of air, now plasma, that is under contraction. I hope that you are as amazed as I was the first time I learned of this effect. On February 26, 97, we got a little glowing bubble. One word can easily sum up achieving sonoluminescence: wahoo. The process by which this is conducted in the lab and the material used and available to us now are not and is not the exact way God would have done it before even light was formed. But this experiment, which will be expanded on in the coming years, is a good place to start. The point of this experiment is that sound can produce light, just like Genesis records God did in the beginning, and it is reproducible, experimentally confirmable science. This is not evidence for you to believe in or not. This is scientific proof. God spoke light into existence. Scientists spoke light into existence. The more one studies these things, the more one realizes that sound is the creative principle. It must be regarded as primordial.
This star in a jar is made when a sound wave is passed through a small bubble inside a flask of liquid. And this sound wave makes the bubble do something remarkable. First it expands, then it collapses. And this collapse happens so violently that vapor molecules trapped inside the bubble slam together and heat up so much that the bubble gives off an incredible burst of heat and light, several thousand times a second, giving the appearance of a star. What made the phenomenon so exciting was the temperature of this star in a jar. On its surface alone, the light burns at tens of thousands of degrees. And Seth Putterman now contemplated a tantalizing possibility. Could the core of the collapsing bubble be even hotter? Hot enough for fusion?
One of the mysteries of sonoluminescence is to determine exactly how hot the interior of the bubble gets. In the sun, the interior can be millions of degrees, hot enough to cause fusion. And the thought crossed my mind that perhaps inside the collapsing bubble, the interior of the bubble might also get hot enough to cause fusion.
If so, this would be something truly amazing. By simply bombarding tiny bubbles with sound waves, temperatures of over 10 million degrees would be created. And nuclear fusion, the same reaction that powers the sun, would be happening almost effortlessly here on Earth.
No single phenomenal category can be claimed as the aboriginal principle. We cannot say, in the beginning was number, or in the beginning was symmetry, etc. These are categorical properties which are implicit in what brings forth and what is brought forth. By using them in description, we approach the heart of the matter. They are not themselves the creative power. This power is inherent in tone, in sound, the holographic nature of matter and the universe. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Genesis 1, 3 through 5. Here is where a lot of misinterpretation begins by a lot of people on both sides of the fence. That is science and religion. First, the greater and the lesser lights. That is the sun, the moon, a reflector, the stars, are not created until day 4. And for reasons I won't get into here, there was no pre-existent universe that Lucifer somehow messed up, and it became darkness and void. So empty your mind of all the dross, and let's look at this step by step as God has begun to create the universe. The first step was going from a complete void, or bare vacuum, to a physical vacuum filled with his own life force, which is the infinite zero-point energy field. This also means that until he spoke to it, it was only potential energy. PE equals KQR. Well, God himself is the constant K, which is everlasting. Q is the charge of the body studied, and well, he is omnipotent, so that is infinite. And R is the distance measured, which we're talking about a point in history where there wasn't even defined space yet. Which makes sense, because today there is no space to a ZPE field either. If it fills all the space everywhere, even the space between the particles that make up the container you are observing it in, how have you contained it? Truth is, you haven't, and there is no time definition and no space definition in a ZPE field. This means that while it is still, it contains an indefinable amount of PE, all the energy you will ever need, the ultimate renewable resource. Nikola Tesla tapped into this at the beginning of the 20th century. Financial interests destroyed his work. If you want experimental proof of this, read about his experiments. I will not be including them here. The second step was to take all that potential energy and change it into kinetic energy. In other words, useful energy as Tesla proved. It is here where the first law of thermodynamics began. The law states that the total inflow of energy into a system must equal the total outflow of energy from the system, plus the change in the energy contained within the system. In other words, energy can be converted from one form to another, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So, in the first step of creation, God changed the force of his energy into the zero-point energy, then with the interaction of sound and light, turned the indefinable amount, PE of the system, into an indefinable amount of KE. This leads us into the definition of entropy, which is rather complicated to the layman. The thermodynamic entropy, or simply the entropy, S is a measure of the internal microscopic disorder present in a system at thermodynamic equilibrium, or equivalently, the number of possible internal configurations available to the system. Internal microscopic disorder does not mean that there could be random processes that could lead to evolution of the species. This means that inside the system of creation, there are reversible thermodynamic transformations happening all around you, life to death to life, and that they are infinitesimally close to thermodynamic equilibrium of the whole system at all times. We see microevolution, small-scale gene changes over successive generations, producing different types of the dog kind, but we could never possibly see macroevolution, lizards to birds. Since these internal or local transformations are infinitesimally small, then evolution would need an indefinable number of years for macroevolution to work through the process of natural selection. This stumbling block has been noted by evolutionists, and why they recently have added a new systematic spin on natural selection called the power of chunking, Appendix D. For example, you half the number 1 to 0.5, and then continue halving the number into an indefinable amount of times and never change the number to 0, although you just created an infinite amount of intermediates. Anyway, this also further proves that God himself cannot create something from nothing, but had to take energy from himself and change it into a different form, take that energy and change it from PE to KE, and now we have an indefinable amount of entropy in the system, which is the number of possible internal configurations available to the system. All of it is based on a process called transduction. But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. We still need to understand what this light is in our above context. And God said, "Let there be light." So God introduced sound across this still pond, It starts bubbling and jiggling and popping, but then the command, light. But this is no ordinary sound like I would say light or you would say light. God does not use words like us, but uses pure waveforms. Essentially, it would be musical, which is why during the Renaissance era, music was thought to be God's voice. The voice of God would be similar to hearing a whole symphony all at one instant, except it wouldn't be all the individual sound waves of the symphony. It would be their mathematical resultant. One single wave. This will become an important concept and proven in chapter 2. This is what God did here at this point in creation. He issued forth one single wave that comprised the whole electromagnetic spectrum from 1 to infinity hertz. This, consequently, is the foundation of, also comprising every form of, everything that is electrical in nature. This instantaneously radiated throughout the ZPE field in all directions. Remember that as you begin to form a word, the sound actually precedes the formulation of it. It is the same here. The field began to pop particles by the issuance of sound, then, before they could disappear, were turned into another form, the full electromagnetic spectrum, creating every waveform that would ever possibly come into existence. This spectrum actually has no boundaries, meaning it comprises within its period the beginning and ending of everything else. So herein we can answer the photon problem. It does have zero mass and true light, not artificial light reflected, is omnipresent and doesn't actually move at all. Perhaps all we have ever measured is reflected light, which predictably should have completely different properties than the true light source, seeing that some light would be absorbed by the material, some pass through, and only a small portion would be reflected and measurable. Well, a thought may be going through your head that you think light comes from the sun. True, some light does, but only a small portion comprising only one single octave of the whole boundless spectrum. So wouldn't it make more sense that there was a foundation from which the sun sprang forth or was created from a certain pattern, and that it would radiate only those energies from which it was formed? The whole spectrum, if you could see it all at once, would be a bright white light. This is the color of the frequency at which the electromagnetic spectrum moves through the ZPE field. It comprises all wavelengths of any visible form of matter. But each and everything that exists is comprised of a whole symphony of wavelengths. Yet, to God you have a single mathematical resultant wave. This is your true name. This is how He identifies you and can know the very number of your hair. There is one thing about it. Your resultant wavelength is either harmonic with or dissonant to creation. Is it any stretch of your mind to understand that this is the third point of the triangle of creation? It is boundless and radiates in all directions, just like ZPE and sound. From these three, all creation is purely, mathematically, and at this point in history, harmoniously interconnected to everything else that could possibly be. This foundation, then, we can evidently see is the anatomy of the triune God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. All are infinite, all are omnipresent, all are omnipotent. There is no time and no space to contain them. Everything that exists comes from this triangle. This reality no longer then becomes a matter of faith, although faith truly is the science of spirituality, and spirituality is true science as long as it is harmonious to the powers of creation. This is the future, and the more you study this faith science, the more you begin to see reality all around you. There was a time in our recorded history that scientists actually stretched their minds to be able to see into the reality, but we digressed and became more involved with the concrete illusion of our existence. And still, with all our advances and the hundreds of thousands of experiments, present science still cannot explain its origins, cannot explain its life, and will always be looking for that missing particle while destroying innocent living parts of reality in the process. God, then, also no longer becomes a matter of mere belief, but one of understanding and knowledge, episteme, and faith, the science of spirituality, has been our teacher to bring us to the reality of our existence. And God said, "Let there be light." Since I have related faith to a type of science, then I am going to make a few quotes from a scientific text that some of you may have never studied before I get back to the science you are so used to. Yes, this is very important here. It is for your understanding of whom or what this light is, and for the science to come further in this hypothesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light which gives light to every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness of him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, He who comes after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. And of his fullness we have all received, and grace for grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him." John 1:1 through 18. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled of the word of life. For the life was manifested, and we have seen it, and bear witness, and show unto you that eternal life, which was with the Father, and was manifested unto us. 1 John 1:1 through 2. The teacher said, "I am the light that lights up everything. I am the all. They all came out of me, and it splits open over me. Break open a piece of wood, and you'll see me there. Lift up a stone, and you'll find me." The Coptic Gospel of Thomas 77. Electrophotography and spectroscopy shows that light is emitted from all objects, including you and me. But let's look at some more experiments to prove that this light is Jesus Christ. In order to do that, we will look into the amazing experiments of Alain aspect, in order to understand why this is the most important step in creation, and why the all came out and splits open over Christ, which literally means the one who is anointed with light, which is why the term Christian, a part of Christ, cannot be loosely interpreted to mean every person who walks through the door of a church. We must understand the nature of a hologram. To make a hologram, the object is first bathed in the light of a laser beam. Then a second laser beam is bounced off of the reflected light of the first, and the resulting interference pattern, the area where the two laser beams commingle, is captured on film. Before I move on with this quote from Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe, I want to be sure you understand the point of this. So far, there are only two laser beams intersecting here, commingling. And up to verse 2 in the order of creation, there are only two interacting bodies, the Father and the Spirit, and they are commingling over a void of nothingness. So why can't the light of verse 3 be the sun? When the film is developed, it looks like a meaningless swirl of light and dark lines. Okay, well, there is no infinite photopaper in space, nor is God a meaningless swirl of light and dark lines. What this is telling us is that with the coming together of only two objects, it doesn't give you any picture of what it is. So actually, at this point, God cannot create any substance that we see in our universe yet. Therefore, that light is not the light of the sun. But as soon as the developed film is illuminated by another laser beam, a three-dimensional image of the original object appears. Hence, the Son of God appeared. This is why God had to create another personality, so that everything after this point would take on a different appearance, although made of the same substance. Also, we see here the importance of the Trinity in that, until Christ, the light or day, was instituted, nothing would have had shape or dimension. Everything created would just be like the angels and God was, ether-like. Hence a three-dimensional universe. This is why everything is 3D, and as reality would have it, all other shape and dimension is based on this unity. But there is more to this holographic puzzle. The three-dimensionality of such images is not the only remarkable characteristic of holograms. If a hologram of a rose is cut in half and then illuminated by a laser, each half will still be found to contain the entire image of the rose. Indeed, even if the halves are divided again, each snippet of film will always be found to contain a smaller but intact version of the original image. Unlike normal photographs, every part of the hologram contains all the information possessed by the whole. The whole in every part, nature of the hologram provides us with an entirely new way of understanding organization and order. This is why no matter how many times you throw particles at a nickel plate, you will always, to infinity and beyond, find a smaller particle, a whole in every part intact version of the original. And because of entropy, which we described earlier, inside the macrocosm they will always have an infinitesimally small difference. But what does this say about the whole creation? Every piece of it is a small but intact version of the original ZPE medium, or God, which disintegrates the need for a Big Bang theory. This means that when Christ said that you snap a piece of wood and he's there, or pick up a stone and he's there, he wasn't making it up. This also means that all dissonant effects do not come from God, such as death and disease, nor does he use it to punish sinners. God is perfect. His creation is perfect. We are not now perfect. This also means that homosexuals are not born with these tendencies. Since none of those things are part of the original image, then we are the cause of our own dissonance, which brings us to our own pain, disease, death, and destruction. When God said, "Let there be light," he was dividing the image of himself into this light. Both halves containing all the exact same attributes, eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, etc., including knowledge and information. An express image or clone of each other. A simple understanding of this creation event, coupled with the experiments of Alan Aspect, proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that Jesus Christ, the person who walked the earth 2,000 years ago, was and is the Son of God, and his earthly manifestation was nothing but a holographic image of the original God the Father. So now, instead of some spiritual ether, a deep or waters, we now have a 3D construct, a new foundation on which to build everything that now is. We have established all shape, all power, current, voltage, and physical laws that will make the construction of the universe and allow it to replicate itself over and over again indefinitely. Now we must understand scientifically what a day is in creation time, when there is no time, as we perceive it to be, yet. God divided the light from darkness. This means he divided the thing he just created, the physical vacuum, something, from the bare vacuum, nothing. Well, a quick point needs to be made here, which will be important in a minute. The bare vacuum, outside of this new creation, was also boundless and measureless. This means that an infinite and boundless something was created in an infinite and boundless nothing. I know that may be a little trippy to visualize, but this will be necessary for the next creation event. So what is going on here? Well, the two need to be divided, separated, and named, similar to final velocity minus initial velocity. So God called the light, the infinite illuminated physical vacuum he created by his word and life force. Day, the capital letter, denotes a personality. The darkness, the infinite void whose face was formless and empty, he named night. The evening and the morning were the first day. This day can be observed by an analogy. When calculating the velocity of an object from point A to point B, you have to take 3 measurements. The first is the object's initial velocity, 6 at point A. The second measurement is the object's final velocity at point B, VF. And the third measurement is the object's time it takes to get from point A to point B. So, subtracting the two and dividing by the time, you will get the velocity of the object traveling through a path from point A to point B. In creation, then, the calculation would be more like where something wasn't, subtracted from where something now is would equal a day. Remember, there is not time yet, so to say that it took 1,000,000 years is erroneous, just like to say that it was 24 hours is erroneous. You can't say infinite amount of time either, because nothing would have ever been created at all. Remember, infinite is still a measurement, sort of, but non-existent time is not measurable, meaning that this event and all creation events that happened on these days are, for all intents and purposes, instantaneous. A lot like our particles in a ZPE field. They pop in instantaneously, only from now on, they won't disappear. Only one being has neither beginning nor end, nor can have, and that is God, and his duration is eternity, properly and most strictly taken, which is a duration inferring simple interminability of essence all at once existing without succession. Eternity in the most proper acceptation that excludes not only an actual beginning and end, but all possibility of both, and denotes indefectibility of essence a part ante and a part past, existing all at once in one continued immovable instant, without consideration of anything in it past or to come, though it always was and will be. Plainly to every capacity might this be plainly adapted. If you look backwards, you cannot think of any one moment wherein God was not. If you look forward, you cannot think of any one moment when God shall not be. For if there had been one moment when God was not, nothing could have been, neither God nor creature, unless that which is nothing could make itself something, which is impossible. This quote comes from an early 1700 manuscript, which I found some years ago on some microfilm at the Ball State University Library. Hopefully that clears up the question, what created God? A pitifully base question and philosophical argument from atheist camps. In order to come to that question in the first place, you would have to assume that he exists first. Otherwise, it is completely irrational to ask. Further, to know how something came to be is not a prerequisite to believe it is there. You do not need to know the name of the company that constructed the Golden Gate Bridge to believe it is there and compels you to travel across it. You simply accept that there was a designer, and you trust that they worked up to specification for holding the thousands of cars that use it every day. You simply accept that it is there, even if you had no sight. Based on the words of others, you would still be compelled to traverse its span. To understand the origin of God is not a prerequisite for knowing he is there. If I were from a different country and had never heard a single word about Golden Gate Bridge, I would not need a history lesson on where and how it came to be there to simply see that it is there, and thousands of others use it as well. Nor do I discredit the thousands who use it to do an engineering inspection to make sure it is a sound bridge. Nor do I have to check the molecular structure of the composite materials to be sure all of those thousands of drivers aren't out of their loon. No, rational discourse says that I should use the bridge. I see it is there. It is supporting thousands of others. Therefore, I shall cross it as well. For someone to require the history of how something derived its existence before accepting that it actually exists is completely irrational and irrelevant to the fact that it exists. The question what created God proves God is. Merely to debate his existence means that he exists. The only person the atheist is debating is yourself to whether he exists or not, because the obvious thought that he does exist is in your mind already, which is why you must fight against it. The debate forum is your way to ridicule others as a form of psychological projection, because inside you feel ridiculed already. God and Jesus Christ are constantly on the lips of every atheist and unbeliever. The truth is, they believe God exists. They are only in rebellion to what they believe in. To not believe in God simply because you do not know his beginning is irrelevant to the fact that to come to that question he must be, and you must already believe he is. God's answer to the question was given to Abraham, I am that I am. The only thing in existence that atheists require a history of before believing in it is God, even though 99.5% of the world's population from the beginning of time have believed, known, and entrusted their lives to him. It is the human nature and condition to believe there is a God, It is inescapable, and this is proof he exists. I think this will make more sense on the next day of creation, but now that we have 1. Created a system with an immeasurable potential energy. 2. Changed all the PE to kinetic energy. 3. Established the triune God and three-dimensionality. 4. The whole universe at this point is totally illuminated. 5. Many sounds together have a resultant wave, a master wave sound, their single tone. 6. That master wave sound is the name by which God called all things into existence. In the future, this could possibly be seen by an electromagnetic resonance imager EMRI. We can now move on to the next logical aspect of creation, the creation of space. Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing ever happened. Winston Churchill, the firmament, and God's permanent magnetic motor. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Genesis 1:6-8. As God goes through the rest of these days speaking matter into existence, since light now fills all space, he will be using this light and the sound of his voice to create everything in the universe. Even though the implication concerning the firmament in these verses could be construed as something solid, this would not make sense. We are talking about the next logical step in a creative order. We are creating space. We have an extending of the physical vacuum to encompass and fill the void of the bare vacuum of the beginning. Also, a boundary is being created. You can visualize this as being similar to the atmosphere of Earth. The only difference between Earth's atmosphere of gases and the gases in outer space is the concentration. The words here mean, in the original translation, to overlay or expand, to stretch out as in stretching a sheet of gold which can be pounded so thin that you can see through it, a visible arch. Meaning, there is a separation of sorts, not a complete division as in the days, but a noticeable difference between the waters from above and the waters below, or what is in this arch or firmament. The word firm sort of throws everyone's thinking off, I think, but this distinction is very important scientifically speaking. This can be better visualized with a term from construction called plenum. In construction, a plenum is the space created between the true ceiling and the raised ceiling tiles, and this allows for ambient airflow. This will help you visualize the separation here, although this doesn't imply the creation of anything new. This is all being done within the ZPE field. Also, don't think that now there is a spherical hole inside of the ZPE field all around it. That is erroneous thinking also. Think more along the lines of a pyramidal hula hoop in the bottom of the ocean. They are both filled with water, except the water inside the hula hoop was stretched out to have a different concentration than the water outside the hula hoop. Take away the hoop, and imagine the concentration difference will remain different, and you have the creation of the firmament. What God created here was what we call outer space, or the universe. Yes, it contains water, and has only recently been verified by astronomers. The firmament is actually a created medium with a density of about 4 × 10 to the 93rd power, a 4 followed by 93 zeros, grams per cubic centimeter, GM/CEM. A medium of such density has some interesting properties. First of all, the reaction time of the firmament to any change within it is about 10 to the power of 78 seconds, faster by far than any chemical, atomic, or nuclear reaction. To help you see how fast changes can occur in the firmament, it takes you about 2 seconds to blink. That's 2 to the power of -1 second. So by the time you blink, 1 followed by 78 zeros, reactions can occur. Or the inverse is that for one reaction to occur in the firmament, it would take only a fraction of a second that looks like 78 zeros followed by 1. This is important to understand because from the issuance of God's voice, to the completion of his command. For anything to work properly without causing dissonance and cancellation, it has to come together fully functioning all at once, or else it won't work. It is this same sort of time scale that allows all 1.7 trillion cells in your body to carry out their functions. It is also this sort of time scale that allows your mind to think and recall information. Well, this is all really cool, but the one thing science cannot ever answer is why. So why is this important to create this space? Why not just put everything in the boundless in all directions ZPE field? Well, what you have to remember is that on the seventh day, God rested. This means that the creation has to be a self-sustaining machine of sorts that will need no power source after the seventh day. Well, first, we need a motor. Only the motor we need can have no solid moving pieces, must be absolutely frictionless, and must capture and reuse its own energy loss. And don't forget, we are on a tight time scale, so you must think it, build it, and have it working properly in about 10 to the power of 78 seconds. Let's remember one thing. Science nor man has ever created anything. We have only ever rearranged already existing pieces of creation. Secondly, we never created any laws of reality either. These two have also always been there, and we just observed them happening. Well, we created the motor, right? That's an invention, right? Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but God did it first. So how does it work? Let me show you what I learned in Dr. Van der Meer's physics class. An electric motor changes electric energy into rotational mechanical energy. A motor works on the principle the coil can rotate continuously in one direction. The coil, or coils, is mounted on a large cylinder called the rotor or armature. When the armature is in any position, the magnetic field surrounding it exerts forces on the system. However, when the coil, which is rotating clockwise or counterclockwise, passes beyond the vertical position, the surrounding magnetic field would then act to return the coil back to vertical if the current remained the same. But if the current could somehow be reversed at that critical moment, the forces would reverse, and the coil could continue rotating in the same direction. Thus, alternation of the current is necessary. The striking similarity between the fields produced by a bar magnet and by a loop of electric current or a solenoid, similar to a motor, offers a clue that perhaps the magnetic field produced by a current may have something to do with ferromagnetism. The electrons are charged and so constitute an electric current and therefore produce a magnetic field. Electrons themselves produce an additional magnetic field, almost as if they and their electric charge were spinning about their axes. I will endeavor to explain this in a second. Remember, particle, small but complete intact version of the whole. It is the magnetic field due to electron spin that is believed to produce ferromagnetism in most ferromagnetic materials, such as iron. It is believed today that all magnetic fields are caused by electric currents. All materials are slightly magnetic. All magnetic fields are produced by electric current. This goes back to our explanation earlier of when God said, over the still ZPE field. It wasn't until God spoke that it had force. So it follows that since the foundation of all matter is magnetic, all materials would be magnetic based on current. This is proven in electrons. They have a magnetic field based on current, and they appear to be spinning about their own axis because I am about to show that is the construction of the whole universe, and electrons are a particle of that. All materials are slightly magnetic. Well, that makes sense. The ZPE medium, at a certain x, y, and z coordinate, was thinned out, creating the firmament. How did it get pounded out? By the current from God's voice performing work over the ZPE field in approximately 10 to the power of 78 seconds. Sound carries energy, as we proved earlier. How did God make his frictionless machine? God created space by choosing an x, y, and z coordinate point and pulling and spreading it out in 3 dimensions. Think back to the Casimir force F equals K/D4, where K equals P, HC 480. This means that since force and distance are inversely proportional, as distance increases, force will decrease. Then, at a point of equilibrium, everything that would come into the firmament would have a frictionless surface in which to move, and still have enough gravitic force to hold it in a certain place, since force and K are directly proportional. You can visualize this spreading out by thinking about how someone makes a clay pot on a potter's wheel. First, you need rotation. Next, you need lubrication, and this is where the waters above meet the waters below. Third, the clay can be spread up and out, from a narrow base to a wider top, similar to a vase. The difference, in consideration of the universe to the potter's wheel, is that this becomes the coiled rotor of the motor. The ZPE field above the firmament is the magnetic field that surrounds the rotor and exerts a force, F equals K/D4, on the rotor of the universe. Since there is an infinitesimally small distance of separation between the firmament to the surrounding ZPE field, then that force becomes infinitely large. The only thing that is keeping it from collapsing is, literally, upholding all things by the word of his power. Anyway, this upholding by the word of his power leads us to Faraday's law. In order for God to create all the power necessary for everything to work for an infinite amount of time and sustain an infinite amount of reactions, he had to induce a voltage. P equals 4, where P is the power of the universe, 1 is the current of the universe, already determined, and 5 is the voltage induced. This is the point of this whole day's construction. If God is the battery providing current by his voice, where is the voltage going to come from after he is done creating? Enter Faraday's law, where voltage induced equals N multiplied by X, multiplied by the change in phi, divided by the change in T, where N equals the number of spins in the upward and outward spiral of the universe. The change in phi is the change in magnetic flux, and the change in T is the change in time. And time in this sense is the difference between where something wasn't to where something now is. To change the flux, you can change the angle, change the area, or change the field. When God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters," he did all three. Magnetic flux is the number of magnetic field lines going through the coil. This is what is so important about the upward and outward vase-type construction of the firmament. This allows for an everlasting increase in the number of magnetic field lines to go through the infinite coil of the spiraling universe. A spherical shape would never sustain this. This also puts to rest the thought that the firmament is something solid or even a vapor canopy, because this would disrupt the movement of the field lines. To further bolster the importance of this creation event, the heaven, and why it is so important to a self-sustaining energy machine that can last an indeterminate amount of time, we can apply Lenz's law, which states, an induced current flows in a direction to create a magnetic field which will counteract the change in magnetic flux. Lenz's law is used to determine the direction of the conventional electric current induced in a loop due to a change in magnetic flux inside the loop. To produce an induced current, you need A, a closed conducting universe, and B, an external magnetic flux through the loop that is changing in time. A is the firmament and B is the upward and outward construction and the spin of the universe inside the external ZPE field. This event is the beginning of the time-space continuum inside the heaven or universe. The best way to understand this continuum and to understand the holographic universe better, think about it as two mirrors facing one another and the indeterminate reflections between them. Don't they appear to get smaller, hence infinite amount of smaller particles? Except tilt both mirrors at an angle of 45 degrees and place another mirror on top and then look at the reflections, and this will be like the time-space continuum. This also lays to rest of whether the universe is an open or closed system. It is a closed system. We can now add Ohm's law to Faraday's law, and we get current induced. 1 equals voltage induced 5 divided by resistance R, or 1 equals 5R. But what is the resistance? Remember earlier that I said our machine would have to be frictionless? Well, where is the resistance to space? There is no resistance. Therefore, the current induced equals the voltage induced, or 1 equals 5. Now add to this the fact that power equals current times voltage, or P equals 4. Then the power that the machine can produce over time is squared, or P2/T. This means that no matter what else happens to this machine over the next few days, the power of the system will increase by a power of 2 for every day that it exists. In this way, the laws of thermodynamics are not violated because the firmament is a magnetic force field, a mixture of 2 different concentrations of the ZPE field itself. This is very important to understand because it is the firmament which spreads the much denser ZPE field surrounding it through a disbursement through and around the firmament and not directly into the space inside the firmament. It is only after this refraction, similar to light through water, that the infinite amount of ZPE is allowed into the finite amount of space. This must be mathematically precise to a degree that we cannot even fathom. The reason for this is because of the laws of thermodynamics. The change in energy for the system plus the change in energy of the surroundings must equal 0 in order to satisfy law number 1. The change in energy is equal to the heat exchange between the system and its surroundings plus the work done by or on the system. Work that is done on the system within the firmament by the surroundings without the firmament is an endothermic reaction. This means that the system will be absorbing the exact amount of energy necessary to perform the work of creation on each of the 7 days. But let's understand why time was created. It was created for us and all the reactions inside the system, so that for every 24-hour period to us, all the energy used up for every reaction inside the system that would occur after the initial God days would have an equal amount of energy to replace the loss coming in. So, how do I explain the expanding universe inside a closed system? Simple. First, think of what force is. Force is anything that acts on a body to cause change. Second, think about what work is. Work done is equal to the applied force multiplied by the distance the object moves. If you think about it, is the motor system, ZPE field outside, magnetic firmament, universe inside, moving across some length of distance? No, but it is rotating like any motor ever invented. Not only that, but it is rotating up and out like an inverted pyramid, like our vase example earlier. So, as the creation moves up and outward, this appears as expansion and solar systems moving away from each other. But let's not forget that God's not done talking. We're only on the 2nd day of creation, which means that even more current will be induced, for even more voltage and even more power to get even more work done. But let's not get lost in the awesomeness of this science and remember that everything is being built layer upon layer, just like an upward and outward spiral, and the initial foundation is sound, light, and the ZPE field, or as I should say, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So before we move to the next day, I want to add a little more pertinent information. That all nations of men should seek the Lord and perhaps feel their way toward Him and find Him. Yet He is actually not far from each one of us, for in Him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed His offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now He commands all people everywhere to repent, because He has fixed a day on which He will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom He has appointed, and of this He has given assurance to all by raising Him from the dead. Acts 17:27-31. A human being is part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if humanity is to survive. Albert Einstein.